Hi everyone, welcome to the helpmyaddiction.com.au YouTube channel. My name is Darren Hamburger and today's topic will be discussing 12 tips in speeding up your addiction recovery. So sit back, relax and enjoy, and let's talk about the first tip. The first point, people, places and things. These three categories are very important to keep at the forefront of your mind when overcoming an addiction. The reason being is that when a relapse occurs, it usually involves at least one of these different categories. If we start off with people, we need to ask ourselves the question, who are we interacting with? Why are we interacting with them? Are they friends who assist us to be sober? Perhaps they're a drug dealer. Maybe they're a known associate who perhaps inadvertently encourages us into situations where we might relapse. Or even perhaps it's a person who actively enables your addiction. For example, a mother providing an opioid dependent person money to prevent them going out and stealing and getting into trouble. By reviewing the people who are involved in supporting us versus enabling our addiction, we're able to better understand how to avoid certain people and how to avoid triggers. The second aspect is places. We need to be very aware of where are the places which might be more likely to trigger a relapse. Is it a drug dealer's house? Is it a friend that uses drugs? Do they use the drugs in front of you? Perhaps it's a pub that you might walk by, or even maybe it's an RSL club who might have poker machines. Places might trigger us or might lead us into a situation where we might relapse. The third point I'd like to bring up is things. Things are generally objects associated with the addiction. For example, a person might have a favorite ice pipe, or they might have a favorite drinking cup when they're drinking alcohol at home. These things we need to be very mindful of, again, because sometimes they lead into a routine, and these routines may inadvertently cause a person to relapse. Only by reviewing these three categories do we then start to understand the various dynamics which are continuously in play, which may lead to triggers to relapse. So feel free to take a moment to press pause so you may be able to take some time to contemplate and perhaps jot down on a piece of paper on what triggers are associated with people, places and things. Okay, so the second point I'd like to discuss is reviewing your associations. Now, I understand that this may sound very similar to the first section of what I talked about with the people section. However, this second point, there is a slight variation. By reviewing these associations, it helps us to be able to better tease out unhealthy relationships from the healthy relationships. You may recall in the first point that I had suggested to take a moment to jot down the triggers associated with people, places and things. With those people that you listed, what I'd like you to do is take those lists and categorize them to those people who are the closest and most important, and to the other side, the people who are completely random people. With another piece of paper, I want you to draw a small circle and put the people that are closest and most important and place them inside that first circle. Now I'd like you to draw a second circle which is larger and surrounds the first circle, and there I would like you to put in the people that are secondly most important. Continue adding larger circles while adding different categories of your associations. So in the end, once you've finished, you'll have a small circle with the people that are most important with your life, and you might have multiple circles, and the outer region would be the people that are most distant in your life. They might be completely random people. For example, we might have immediate family in the small circle, and the next circle we might have friends, and then we might have another circle that might be distant family, another circle might be associates, and another circle might be completely unknown strangers. Now that you've completed writing down the associations in the relevant circles, I want you to keep this piece of paper, because this piece of paper is a diagram which highlights the different categories of associations and their level of importance within your life. Addiction has a tendency to blind us from important things in life. The diagram you've just completed will help you refocus your attention to those who are more important in your life and perhaps those who are best to be with for additional support. Conversely, this diagram may also demonstrate the less important associations we sometimes confuse as important when the addiction is in full flight. You could also extend this diagram by listing which people are most supportive preventing addiction, or which people may have closer connection to your relapse. Let's move on to our third point, understanding what triggers relapse. Firstly, let's define what a trigger is. We can consider a trigger as best described as any of our 5 senses which activate the desire to participate in an addiction we are trying to cease. A couple of examples could be seeing a person intoxicated in a drug and alcohol group, the taste of alcohol or a cigarette. Maybe it's a combination of alcohol and cigarette. The sound of poker machines. It may even be the smell of beer at a pub. Either way, there are many different combinations of triggers, and trying to learn and understand what triggers us or motivates us to relapse is fundamental in trying to overcome an addiction. Triggers can also be associated with emotions, situations, withdrawal. They may cause constant rumination, or any other association to the addiction of the past. Ultimately, having an understanding what triggers your relapse is extremely important and fundamental in preventing the relapse from occurring. Without insight to triggers, you're likely to find yourself unable to evaluate risks of relapse, thus haphazardly re-entering an ongoing relapse cycle and not avoiding relapse-invoking situations. As an exercise, with a piece of paper, try listing down all of the possible triggers that you've experienced in the past, or even currently that you're experiencing. You may even consider talking to a support person, such as a close friend, a family, or even a therapist, just to see if they're aware of any additional triggers which may have caused you to relapse in the past. So feel free to press pause and write down the list of triggers which you've experienced in the past. So let's move on to point 4. Be proactive when seeking help. Behind the scenes, addiction is similar to depression, much in the same way that its function is happiest the most when it's in isolation and hidden. This often causes people to feel distant from others. It may lead people to feel addiction is far too strong to overcome. Thus, feelings of helplessness can also increase, and sometimes people may stop trying to give up on their addiction. Speaking out or seeking resources, treatment, and other organizations to try to get out that help is important. But what's more important, it's not just about seeking that help, it's about wanting that help. As a psychologist who has worked with addiction for many years, I can honestly say, many times another person will call on behalf of the person that has the addiction. Unfortunately, what this highlights is the person with the addiction has low motivation to want to stop. Past research has shown in order to overcome addiction, the desire to want to stop needs to be there. So I encourage anyone that's trying to get their friend or relative or whoever it is that the person is trying to overcome the addiction, and you're trying to get someone help. One of the main things I would suggest is trying to encourage that person to pick up that phone, or you may even help take the person to a therapy session or to see their doctor. But it's really important the person with the addiction has to make that step themselves in order to stop that addiction. If you're a person trying to help a person overcome their addiction and you're doing all the legwork, it's highly likely the person that you're trying to help has very low interest in wanting to stop, and that in itself may also decrease the chances of successful treatments. After all, if I use another analogy for addiction and in its place use weight gain, you cannot expect to lose weight if you do not get up and do something about it and do exercise, change your diet. After all, no amount of reading a diet book is going to cause you to lose weight unless you do something about it. So therefore I suggest addiction is no different. If the person with the addiction is not willing to get up and try to do something for themselves, there's every chance that the addiction will stay with you. The Help My Addiction website has a large list of resources to the local Sydney area. So feel free to go to this website to get contact numbers to other organisations that work with addictions. People who may be listening to this not within the Sydney region in Australia, what I would encourage you to do is just find perhaps a doctor or any type of rehab, you can use Google, use phone books, maybe word of mouth. Other people trying to stop their addiction may have been to rehabs. You could always use these as starting points. Even though this list may not necessarily be helpful to your specific need, those organizations or individuals may be aware of another form of treatment or another organization that might be able to help. Moving towards point 5, stopping the deception, mistruths, omissions of the facts, and stopping all other types of secrets. While there are many downsides to addiction, one specifically relevant to this point are the various acts of deception, mistruths, omissions of the fact, and diversional tactics, which all tend to surface during the course of addiction. These actions are all attempts to maintain the addiction at whatever cost. Unfortunately, it is the cost of ongoing deception which quickly erodes the person's integrity. Eventually, with enough deception, the person is no longer believed by those who are around them and is quite often automatically placed in the can't be trusted corner. Eventually, when the time comes and the individual wishes to gain support to overcome their addiction, the huge amount of dishonesty in the past, which had burnt so many people, now becomes just another hurdle to overcome when trying to get the very people we've hurt just to trust us again. Deception may appear as diversional tactics to draw the person's attention away from a specific topic, or it might be outright denial of intoxication or other behaviours. The provision of grandiose stories, which causes others to be entangled and intertwined into frivolous fact-chasing and thereby wasting time. Omissions of the fact, such as failing to own up to a relapse. These and many more deceptive occurrences are often paired with outright emotional swings to further attempt to influence another person to stop questioning their behaviours. Even outright lies, such as telling a partner you have lost a wallet, when really all of the week's wages has actually been spent at poker machines at the local club. These hallmark behaviours are quite characteristic of addiction. It's something that any therapist will tend to have to address. The person who is trying to overcome addiction needs to embrace honesty. Without doing so, enables the addiction to keep on working in the background. Let's talk about point number 6. Reviewing routine behaviours which lead to relapse. If we look into the automatic behaviours of addiction, routine would rate pretty highly as an influence which is connected to relapse. Routines can be broken, however we must be constantly paying attention in order to do so. In the case of lack of attention, routines can lead to discrete automatic behaviour patterns which contradict our real intentions of trying to prevent addiction from continuing. Several examples of certain routines which might be seen in addiction may be lighting up a cigarette upon first waking, driving home from work past bottle shops you have previously shopped at. For a person trying to quit smoking, perhaps when they are drinking, the automatic routine of having a cigarette in the fingers occurs. Other examples which I've listed in the screen here would be visiting areas known to trigger relapse. Perhaps visiting a friend who uses substances if you've got that substance abuse issue. Having dinner where poker machines are close by. The fallacy of addiction control. This is ultimately the belief that you can use a little bit and have it under control, where in most occasions when people start to use a substance that they previously have a dependency on, they will go back and continue to start using. And the final point would be attending counselling intoxicated. It's most probably no great surprise to hear that it's immensely important to review your typical routines regarding your addiction. By understanding your routines and how they can contribute to your addiction, you can then be in a better place to intervene and attempt to disrupt that possible relapse. Feel free to take a moment to press pause, take out a piece of paper, and start listing down some typical routines that you might be aware of, and try to understand those connections of how your routines and your vulnerabilities occur and how they connect with addiction. Let's talk about point number 7. Stop dissing treatments that don't work and not seeking alternative treatments. By default, it's far too easy to blame others than accepting our own wrongdoing. Even in today's time, the growing trend of blaming others and not accepting our own faults appears to be an ongoing trend. It's easier because we don't have to spend time to look back at our own actions, to weigh up the consequences, and most of all, to accept blame for our own mistakes. Over the years, I've seen countless clients all too quickly blame treatment failure without taking the initiative to try and seek alternative treatments. If you only juggle with oranges, you'd be foolish to expect anything else other than another orange falling into your hand. The same thing can be said with addiction treatment. To continue doing the same thing over and over and over and expecting a dramatic change without reevaluating the reasons behind the treatment failure and trying new options, it's nothing other than just plain foolish. As the saying goes, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. This point of stop dissing treatments that don't work also extends to all other types of treatments. For example, taking antidepressant medication and still being depressed, but not speaking to a doctor to have a treatment review. Being prescribed a medication and not taking it as directed and blaming the medication for not working. Or diverting the methadone that's being prescribed to you, so continued drug use can still be achieved. Otherwise, not openly speaking to your therapist regarding your treatment not working and asking for alternatives. As you can see, the list of possible examples are endless, and believe me, I've heard many treatment failure blaming over the years as a therapist without clients exploring new treatments. To be serious giving up your addiction, it requires you to be 100% committed to your treatment. The health professionals you see are not mind readers. They do want to help you. However, they often see a great deal of other clients as well, so they do rely heavily on the client being open with them. We need to remember it's the client's responsibility to be actively engaging in the treatment, especially with the people involved in your treatment phase, to explore the reasons of why treatment is not working. Addiction is indeed a very strong force to combat. However, despite how you may feel, you're not completely helpless in your treatment. Only by sitting passively are you giving in to the power of your addiction. So to sum this point up regarding stop dissing treatments, I say stop chasing your tail. If what you're doing is not working, try something else after taking a health review with your health professional regarding the reasons why past or current treatments are not working. If you take your addiction treatment seriously, it only increases your chance of success. Okay, let's talk about point number 8. Stop blaming other people or situations for your relapse. We can say there is time for grieving, there is a time for healing. However, in terms of overcoming addiction, there is certainly no time to sit blaming others for your addiction. People experience addiction for many reasons. I don't wish to minimize the causations for their addictions. However, at some point, the buck stops with the person with the addiction, and no amount of finger pointing will assist you in overcoming the addiction if you're consistently blaming other people, other than taking the responsibility for the here and now. It's far too easy to blame yourself out of responsibility. The reality is, each time we participate in an addiction, it is the decision at some level on our behalf. It is all too easy to have an argument, get upset, and then go out and drink alcohol and blame the other person for causing the argument, or using a drug or deciding to gamble, and then later blame the actions of the other person for the argument. Even a common theme in today's environment is to use methamphetamine, end up doing a crime, and then blaming the amphetamine for the crime, when the reality is there's sufficient information for the average person in society to ward off the use of such substances and understand the repercussions of the health effects of such substances. But yet people continue to use these substances, and then once they get into trouble, they're the first ones to try to plead mental health. However, the blame game line of thinking is faulty, and part of the struggle of overcoming addiction is learning to cope with our emotions, especially negative emotions, to gain control of our lives and to make healthier choices without relapse. To summarize this point, take the responsibility of your actions. However, don't beat yourself down about these past actions that have occurred. Learn from them, better yourself. This is what overcoming an addiction is about. Let's move on to point number 9. Distraction, distraction, distraction. The aim of addiction treatment is to completely remove the cycle of going back to the addiction now and at a later date. During the course of addiction, and especially as the addiction worsens, much time is usually spent surrounding that participation and maintaining that addiction. So it's only natural to experience a large idle gap of time or feelings of being lost, bored, and there is nothing to do when an addiction has stopped. How a person manages that spare time is independent of each person's with their addiction. What is it that they say? Idle hands are the devil's work. Idle lips are his mouthpiece. As this topic infers, Distraction activities are usually necessary to try to redirect the brain away from the old addiction's routines. It's only natural that the unwanted intrusive thoughts will reappear from time to time as you're trying to overcome that addiction. Usually, as the gap between the last participation of the addiction widens and the frequency of the urge to do the addiction again will start to dissipate over time. Working, learning new tasks, exploring other interests or other hobbies, even attending support groups, as long as you're not sitting at home in the bedroom on your own, doing nothing day in, day out, it really doesn't matter what you decide to do in this spare time, as long as it's not associated with the addiction. However, I recommend the distraction activities are interesting, fun. Maybe they give you a challenge, or maybe just completely out of the norm, something to refocus your attention on. What we do know from past research is that the more you sit and focus on the addiction or a specific drug or whatever it is, the urge to go back and re-participate in that addiction increases. You could even learn to garden or grow things, learn how to fix a car, go bushwalking. It doesn't really matter what you do. Just don't sit home doing nothing, ruminating about your addiction. While mundane activities still can't be avoided, such as your typical lifestyle responsibilities, try to remember to spice up your life and give it a bit of excitement here and there. If you're just doing things around the house all the time, for example, washing, ironing, vacuuming, mowing the lawn, and you don't really like these tasks, it doesn't really give you a positive case to try to argue why stop an addiction. Because at the end of the day, if you're stopping an addiction and you're just doing something you really hate and you're bored all the time, then why stop? So this is why it's important that these activities need to be uplifting. Otherwise, you're just going to feel like it's the typical Groundhog Day. We need to also remember life is never exciting 100% of the time. And the fast-paced lifestyles of some addictions, there's a fair adjustment to the average person's lifestyle who works and has other responsibilities. In the past, I've had some clients talk about how difficult that's been. For example, if you're a large drug dealer and you've got a lot of money coming in, you're using a lot of drugs, you're drinking, you're going to nightclubs, maybe there's hookers. There's this really big, fast-paced lifestyle, new cars, naming whatever you want you can buy. To get rid of that and then to go back to the average person's lifestyle is a very big adjustment. The last point in this section here would be, don't forget those support people because they are important. Keep the communication open and honest. Engage with them when you're struggling with that spare time or when you're starting to ruminate about your addiction. Point 11 is allowing time for positive rewards and also taking the time to reflect on positive achievements. To keep your morale up, it's important to take the time to reflect on your achievements. With reflection, we're often able to see how far we've come. And on a daily basis, sometimes it feels like we've never really achieved anything. This can cause people to slowly become demotivated in remaining abstinent. It's like saving for a bike. If you're putting money away each week, at the beginning, you don't really see that there's much money there. However, each time you go back each month and you look at your bank account, you slowly see that you're starting to reach your goal. So this is why it's really good to take the time to reflect and see how far and what goals that you've achieved. It might be that you've been able to remain sober for 1 month. To every other person, that may not sound much. However, if you've been drinking for 25 years and never had a day stop drinking, that 1 month is massively important. So again, take the time to reflect and see the positive things that you're achieving. Because addiction takes up so much of our time, once you've removed that out of your life, it tends to leave you empty. So it's really important to give you some time to have a positive reinforcement. There's enough evidence in psychology to demonstrate when we have a positive reinforcement, we're more likely to continue doing a certain action. The positive reinforcement doesn't have to be anything big. However, it must never be connected to the addiction in itself. So what I mean, if you've not drunk alcohol for 2 months, you don't go out and celebrate with a drink with a friend. You don't go to a pub and drink alcohol. If you've been sober and you haven't relapsed of heroin, you don't go off and use any other substances. You don't even go out and use a little bit of heroin thinking that you can control it. So reward yourself, yes. Those rewards don't have to be large. They can be small just to keep the morale going and also to highlight the fact you are still making positive gains. And now we've reached our final point, which is point 12, quit for yourself and not for any other person. The reason I made this a point, over the years while treating clients, I noticed a greater success rate in the group who wanted to stop the addictions for their own improvements and for their own reasons, and not via ultimatums. Those who wanted to stop an addiction because of their partner or a relative or for any other external reason, I found that their success wasn't as great. A good example is if I'm trying to overcome an addiction, but it's because my partner wants me to stop drinking or stop using heroin. If the relationship ends up breaking apart, the founding reason of why I want to stop the addiction is no longer present. So therefore it frees that whole area up to revisit the addiction. So it's important to take that time and think about the reasons why you really want to stop. And this is why I had asked you in previous points to really reflect on circumstances behind your addiction, what the addiction has done, what disruption the addiction has caused in your life, and to really bring that home and really understand and get those fundamental reasons for yourself. So you're more stronger to move forward and be confident the reasons that you want to stop is because of your own reasons and no other person's. Okay, so there you have it. 12 important tips to help you speed up your recovery. I hope this episode has been helpful for you. Please feel free to ask any questions should you not understand any of the content. If you've got this far, I'd like to thank you very much for your time, and I wish you every success in overcoming your addiction. Feel free to head over to the helpmyaddiction.com.au website for any additional addiction-related information. And obviously, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you found this content helpful. Thank you.